on the collaboration, education, and training content track, we have a panel discussion, XR and experiential education, designing and delivering XR content for field trips, extracurricular activities, and classroom simulations. We have a really great lineup of speakers today. We have Mr. David Weeks, Content Director of AWEAsia, Professor Eric Hawkinson, Founder and Learning Futurist at Together Learning, Mr. Etienne Chia, Director of Narrative Experience and Creative Technology at Kingsman Exhibits, and Ms. Yi Yuan, Co-Founder of Hyperlab. Please join me in giving them a welcome.
Thank you very much, Paige. So it's my pleasure to be hosting everyone here at our panel discussion on designing XR for experiential education. So in the way of introductions, I thought that it would be most helpful for us to, because experiential education and its applications in XR's applications in experiential education can be so multifaceted. There are so many different use cases for it. I thought it would be most helpful first for each of our panelists to quickly introduce their own particular levels of experience with XR in education. So starting with myself, I actually started out as an informal educator in 2012. I co-founded a debate organization in China. So my sort of first job after college was running debate tournaments in mainland China. In 2017, I began an XR focus in our practice in creating virtual campus tours for universities, primarily for student recruitment and sort of gaining allowing students from across the world who are interested in exploring different campuses to be able to tour them virtually before they decided on which university they wanted to commit to. So that's my particular level of background on this topic, but for our practical purposes here today, I'm the content director for the AWEAsia events. So with that said, I'd like to invite each of the panelists to just quickly introduce their own particular level of background in the subject, and then we'll dive into the panel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Hawkinson. Please call me Eric. I'm originally from the United States, but I've been based in Japan for the last 20 years. Before I went to Japan, I was in IT, mostly working for Microsoft and a couple of other companies. I became a teacher in Japan, so technology and education combined. Very quickly, I went into using augmented reality, virtual reality in different learning contexts. Now I helped form a new College of Global Tourism and Global Studies at the Kyoto University of Foreign Studies, where I teach classes related and at the intersection of technology, tourism, society, and other sort of social studies work. I have a couple of roles that are relevant for today. One of them is I coordinate research for a group called MAVER, Mixed Augmented Virtual Realities in Learning. We're a fairly small research group, mostly higher education in Japan. Most of our cohort is doing work around designing, doing research, and implementing virtual reality for language learning and language acquisition. And I also design, consult, and curate different experiential, especially in education and higher education, around tourism, learning, language learning, and other contexts for our universities and others. Great to be with you today.
Great. It's nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Etienne. I'm the Director of Narrative Experience and Creative Technology at Kingsman, just across the street. And we do a lot of experiences for museums, exhibitions, pavilions, and through these get to touch a lot of students and other academics through different forms of creative technology storytelling. And extended reality is a very important part of this for everything that we do, such as at the Science Museum, etc. My background is more in marketing, actually. So I came from marketing, digital, experiential marketing, where I started also using VR and AR for different clients, automotive, FMCG, for over 10 years now. So nice to meet you all.
And
And my name is Yuan Yi, so they call me YY as the short form of the I'm from Hyperlab, so I think for this panel, we share a lot of commonalities. I was born and grown, I actually grew up in China, so that's where David has been running his business. I studied global studies and policy making, technology entrepreneurship in National University of Singapore. And as you can see, Eric actually runs a global studies program in Japan. And currently, we are running this company called Hyperlab. We've been running this company for about 10 years. We started off as a company that focuses on immersive technologies, but nowadays we are looking into the combination of various types of emerging tech, such as immersive tech, 5G, AI, spatial digital twin, spatial intelligence, to piece all these technologies together to deliver solutions and products to our end customers. And I actually had a chance to work with Inchen's company previously. Yeah, so I think it's great that we are all here today and we can share some of our experiences, and hopefully that will bring some interesting knowledge or insights to the audience.
So in order to start us off, I thought that it would be most helpful to first wrap our arms around the idea of what experiential education is. I feel like it's a very difficult thing to define. And I think perhaps it's easiest to define in opposition to what it isn't. I think that maybe we can most easily conceive of experiential education as learning not through rote memorization, learning not through static texts, learning not through recitation, and learning not through standardization, but instead learning through subjective experience. So my question for the panel is I'd like to explore what is the value of XR and experiential education activities. For some of us, I think the idea of experiential education brings to mind things that feel very physical, that feel very in person, right? Things like excursions, extracurriculars that involve some kind of face-to-face teamwork or competition, simulations that involve direct face-to-face interaction. So where have you seen XR add the most value to experiential or informal education? And what are some experiential educators doing with XR that they can't do as another tool? So would love to hear any examples that come to mind that drive home or illustrate the value of XR and experiential education.
Thank you, David. So I think one example that comes to mind is especially on the learning aspect. When you go to a field trip, like in a museum, you might have recreations of the environment to put you in the mood, in situation of what that environment might be. So let's say in this one, an exhibition we did called Living World, to learn about all the animals, and you want to see them in their natural habitat. But through XR, augmented reality devices, you're able to see them more in a more lively way and engage with them with more physical presence. So this physical presence allows you to be more participatory, and gamified experiences really help with this memorization as well.
Maybe I'll just add on a little bit. I think that's a great, those are great use cases that Inchin has mentioned. For Hyperlab, we've worked on various types of immersive learning experiences before, from K-12 to Institute of Higher Learning to adult training, even for special education. Right, so all of those are possible scenarios where you can think of immersive learning use cases. I think immersive technology, being immersive technology, it has the ability to break the boundaries of space and time. So when during COVID, for example, if the students are confined within a particular country, you bring them to overseas for some kind of excursion, VR naturally becomes one viable option for people to tap on and make such learning experiences possible, right? And not just in terms of space, and so you can think along the idea of breaking the boundaries of time. We worked on this project with a professor in NTU, and I think nowadays he has left NTU. He's joined a university in the US. But what he does is that he is doing heritage conservation, or like those art history projects in other places. So there was some kind of church where he scanned in Cyprus, and what we're trying to do is to bring these kind of virtual experiences to the students. So we look into the archive pictures, videos, and everything about the history of this particular place. And when we bring that to the classroom, the students can sort of like time travel in a sense that we can refer to the archives, real archives collected by the historians of the past, and they can find out more about the history of such place. Of course, these pictures over here has some augmented reality elements inside of here. can be used in classrooms. It can also be used in other places like museums, right? So we have projects where we've done in the museums. We can augment the physical space with some 3D elements you can't possibly see with your naked eyes. So if you have a device, augmented reality device, as you can see on the first GIF up there on the screen, that is something that allows you to see additional information in your physical reality. So in a sense, you can become an Iron Man in your physical reality and see things from a different perspective.
That's great. Above that, I would just like to comment on thinking about the value of it. It's slightly different depending on what's the stakeholder, who the stakeholder is viewing this. So if you're a student and the learning potential using XR and understanding, as is on this slide here, there's a couple of different things we already know through research that how actually doing things using your body that a lot of XR asks you to do connects to deeper learning, better understanding, and things like that. But what I like to point to is this idea of the empathy machine. And a lot of our research group in Japan has done a lot of great research in learning how, especially virtual expeditions and experiences, shape and give a person a better, deeper connection to the content you're delivering for them. For example, in Japan, students don't have a lot of experience dealing with refugees. There's not a lot of people from other places. So one of our cohort did a study, put their students, it's an academic writing course, to put their students through and experience what it's like to cross the border from Mexico, for example, into southern United States, or to flee Syria and try to get across the Mediterranean to Southern Europe, and their voice, the way what they write and how they write it is changed through the research that they've done here in a very impactful way that's more impactful than perhaps watching a video or having a discussion or doing a lecture in that. So that's one value for students. And for teachers, it's all about the analytics and knowing how to create the experiences.
I was just want to add on top of that is that the analytics aspect is actually very important, because besides XR and extending, bridging reality and digital reality or virtual reality, the simple digitization of those experiences allows for more personalization. And when you create content that's more personalized, the engagement levels are also much higher.
And as an educator, to have analytics on a classroom discussion, right? I think XR is also unique with experiential education in that it does allow teachers to better appreciate and measure levels of student engagement in activities in both in and out of the classroom. I very much appreciate also the reference to cognitive empathy, and I think that kind of harkens back to our keynote from Professor Billinghurst this morning. But of course, this isn't all kittens and rainbows. There are challenges in using XR especially in environments with younger learners or with classrooms that have high faculty to student ratios. So let's talk about some of the challenges now. So XR faces many challenges, especially I'd say in the K-12 space. It might complicate classroom management. If you add another device, that's also another input level on which students might get distracted. It, I think, raises the stakes of questions about ethics, data ownership, and sovereignty. So in your view, what are some of the most significant challenges you've encountered when building XR for education? And what are some best practices or solutions that you'd say have emerged from your experiences with those challenges?
I would like to show you a slide, and I would like to tell you about this data and where it comes from to help us maybe set the frame for answering this question. There's a couple of categories you see in the screen here, and it's from several different sources, one of which is from the Immersive Learning Network, which did a very extensive survey of educators around the world using XR in different contexts. It's also from our research group in Japan, and also my own experience with my business. So affordability, access, training, and buy-in. The content that was also mentioned a couple of times today, and also in the other education panel that we saw earlier today, infrastructure and support. So these all have their own unique challenges depending on what you're trying to do, your target audience, what institution you're working with, what policies they may have. And navigating this as a whole is a challenge in itself, depending on, and also it's been a challenge for the commercial end as well to navigate all of these challenges that each particular client might have on this. And probably I'll let my panelists talk about their experiences, and maybe I can add a little bit more onto that.
Yeah, I'll take this on first. I think this is a great framework that Eric has put up, and to us, I think we find the content development and the infrastructure and support, the last two columns up there, to be quite relatable. So for infrastructure and support, right, when you talk about like spaces, personnel, policy, we have to look into, for example, for example, spaces. Like when we look into conducting virtual reality based experiences, we need to look for a classroom setting where it's comfortable for the students to put on the VR headsets. And likely we need to have external facilitators, either it's ourselves or maybe some partners, to bring the VR devices into the classroom. They need to do all the setup and stuff. The teachers, at least in Singapore, they are usually very busy, and it's quite unrealistic to expect them to set up the whole thing all by themselves. And they actually prefer that someone else is able to set up this whole thing for them. So that's something that we have to take into consideration when we deliver these kind of VR experiences. And of course, when we're talking about augmented reality learning experiences, you may need to consider is something that the students are going to use when they're outside of the classroom. And if that's the case, we definitely also need to manage the students' physical condition a little bit more, because they may get excited and start to run around. Right? So in that case, you have to consider which is the proper location to bring the students out for some kind of AR experiences. As a backup plan, we do have projects where we work with primary schools in Singapore. We use augmented reality and bring some animals to the classroom, for example, like sea whales, sharks, etc., which they can't possibly see in a classroom setting, or maybe most of them don't know how to do diving. And we basically can use VR or AR to bring such animal watching experiences to them. For content and development, I think in the early years, there are short of content which are suitable for educators to use. If you're talking about co-curriculum activities, I'm sure there are a lot of content which are out there which can be selected and be used in classroom setting. If you're talking about content which are specifically designed for the curriculum, for the syllabus, then you have to get the educators' input, get their contribution to the content development, and they may or may not have time for that. So one of the projects we did was with MOE, and they actually engaged the educators to give the pedagogical input. So we looked into the syllabus and we created content for heritage sites in Singapore or like farms. Those are places that students have to study in their textbooks, and we kind of like use immersive tech to make this whole learning experience more vivid to the audience. Yeah, so I think what is more, to summarize, what is more relatable to us, I guess, is the third and fourth column up there. But of course, the first two are definitely considerations for people to consider as challenges.
Of course, another major challenge is the simple wide spectrum of hardware that's available, and the lack of standardizations between different platforms, different brands, and also the speed at which this platform, these hardware platforms are progressing and renewed. So the content that you create 1 year might be obsolete, even just a year or two later. So bringing that down through standardizations, through potentially policy changes as well, can really be helpful. Another thing in terms of the content authoring as well is the management of 3D assets on kind of 3D libraries for the different institutions. So different schools have their own set of contents that can be customized, and that training them in the creation of those assets and the management of those assets, digitization, modeling, photogrammetry will all be very important skills to train the personnel in charge of managing these content platforms for XR.
So seeing is that I think that the discussion of interoperability and the sort of future trajectory of not only our content authoring platforms, but the hardware environment leads us to, I think, another important, probably our final question for today, which is bearing these opportunities, the value as well as the challenges that we encounter today. What do we have to look forward to in the next 3 to 5 years for XR in experiential education? And are there any particular XR use cases pieces of content or modes of teaching that you see in the medium-term future that you find exciting? And if so, what are some of the preconditions, either hardware or software, that exist for those to, that sort of gatekeep those?
If I could just jump back for 1 second about the challenges, I always like, when I get in front of people, I'm a big advocate for privacy using XR. And this is not necessarily the biggest concern for schools. It's because that they're not necessarily aware that it should be a concern. There's a lot of research coming out how we can de-anonymize people. We can understand different things that are happening in your brain just from analyzing and taking in the data of moving your body and your arms and your eyes. Things like understanding if you have learning disabilities, even your sexual orientation can be gleaned from you using virtual reality, augmented reality, much more than other types of content. And more we're seeing institutions try to mitigate the risk that would be on students and also the institutions when they deploy these technologies in educational contexts. Moving towards the future though, we talked about learning analytics and how it can be a great thing to help improve and help educators understand their students and their content to make it much more engaging and enjoyable and beneficial to students. Just like I mentioned, that also has another side to it where that data can be exploited, it can be leaked, it can be used for possibly nefarious things. This is a framework that was already mentioned earlier this morning, the DICE. This is what a framework I give to teachers to help them understand when to implement this technology. Is it dangerous or is it expensive? You put this to this basic framework and you can understand if VR, AR, XR should be used in your educational context. But this context is changing all the time as the costs and deployment of these technologies, the availability of devices goes down. For example, we have a tourism department where we are making and creating virtual tours of places all over the world, which is pretty accessible, but it wasn't perhaps maybe during the pandemic. But because it's cheaper now, we are deploying it more often.
For me, I think moving forward in the next 5 years, I see really three main great opportunities. The first one, I think it relates to the standardization problem and the hardware problem, because we've always talked about hardware being one of the biggest bottleneck in hardware adoption. And so although a $3,600 headset might still be a bit out of reach for many, the Vision Pro that will be released next year, I think will really start a new wave for that kind of standardization and recognition that it deserves. But with that, there's and then the second point is about user interfaces with generative AI and especially LLMs really coming to the forefront today. Natural language interfaces are becoming more and more intuitive, and that I think is something that Apple has integrated quite well in the design of the Vision Pro too. And I think lastly is the opportunity for collaborative experiences. A lot of the XR experiences that we've seen today are still, even in the classroom context when many people can experience the content at the same time, they are not engaging or interfacing with each other around that content in real time. And as tracking and other forms of visualizations in the XR spaces matures, those collaborative opportunities for learning, especially, I think will become more and more prevalent and powerful.
I think those are very, very good points that the previous panelists have brought up. From my perspective, there are also three main points. The first one is regarding the content generated by a lot of laymen in the long run. In the first few years, when AR, VR content creation still need to rely on a lot of programming knowledge, it's not so easy for laymen to create that. But right now, there are a lot of platforms out there which allows people to create virtual learning, virtual tourism experiences. If you don't know how to use Unity or Unreal to create anything, it's fine. There are zero coding, low coding platforms for you to do that. So I think in terms of the democratization of content creation, that's one thing to look into, and that is really unleashing the potential of content creators. People have great ideas, but maybe less technology to create good content. The second one is related to what Inchi mentioned just now. He was talking about generative AI. I think it's very important for any immersive tech practitioner to look beyond immersive tech as a standalone technology. There are other technologies when you're looking to combining them together. There's a lot of powerful application you can think about. So he brought up the idea of using generative AI in immersive interface, right? So maybe in the future, the students will be able to have a live, sort of like a live AI tour guide in the virtual experiences, telling them the history, the story of the different places they go to. And another thing you can possibly look into is probably things like Wi-Fi 6 or 5G, which allows content to stream down from the cloud a lot more easily. Because right now, when we're looking at content distribution, maybe we need to put content in a local device and distribute it. It doesn't give the user that much flexibility to get access to a lot of a huge library of content in the cloud. But if we allow schools to have accessibility to such a network infrastructure, then we would be able to stream down this kind of content to the users. The last point, I said I want to mention 3 points. I think the last point I want to mention is when we look into education itself, education is a very broad idea. So like experiential education is part of it. There are still a lot of other things which probably can't actually be done or be replaced by immersive tech. So things such as abstract thinking, those kind of critical thinking skill sets, they probably can be facilitated with experiential learning, with immersive tech based education experiences. But there's still a lot of things that need to happen in conventional classroom settings, and that aspect cannot be overlooked. Education is a very complicated thing. We need to educate the kids in a way that is going to allow them to grow holistically as a human being.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I feel like we could have gone on for hours, and I recognize that we didn't have time for Q&A, but I do want to be respectful of the next speakers here. I think that there is, in the agenda, we do have a bit of time as a coffee break between our next session. So I suppose we have time. Do we have time for one question? Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, I suppose we can do 1 or 2 here, and then yield the floor to the next.
Hi, I'm Wei Han from Pedagogical Hospital. So in fact, recently we just rolled out one VR module for staff training kind of things. So we are using our wireless headset, dual headset kind of things. So in fact, one of the key challenges that today is we have to deploy one resource just for every staff training. And I will be honest, one of the key reasons is simply because we prevent the headset from go missing. Not that we don't trust our staff, but yeah. But from your experience, like, is there any viable solutions other than CCTV to tackle this headset management, and especially from a security perspective? Thank you.
We developed an immersive learning laboratory that I helped design at our university. Managing headsets is getting better, but it's still very challenging, especially things like the Oculus Quest. They were not made for this type of deployment. There are managerial software solutions, Manage XR, Arbor XR, and a couple of others, where you pay for a service to manage all of the headsets, even remotely from one location. I have helped other universities do that for their distance learning programs where they integrate in virtual augmented reality. Also, you might be thinking about if you're getting together in one spot, maybe having some sort of space where you can view virtual reality, augmented reality in a group setting. So maybe like an immersive dome type situation. I can imagine that could be very powerful in training in medical situations as well.
We'll just add on that we have use cases where we use augmented reality for surgery training. So I think the use case is probably a little bit different from yours, because yours sounds like you're setting up a virtual training lab sort of things. Ours is more about like distributing this training module to the trainees. So they went for AR, which is something that they can use on their own smartphones or like tablets, which gives the accessibility to the trainees while they are not in the hospital. So yeah, I mean, I guess that could be a direction to think about, but depending on the ultimate goal of the project you have, whether it's to use it in the lab or whether it's to like scale it up for people to have access to.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Through my own work, I have no good answer to this. Nearly all of our stuff is either mobile AR or web-based VR or web XR. So, but occasionally we did see a college fair that was actually put on by the U.S. Commercial Service, where they actually traveled to different countries with Quest 2s, and they actually use the diplomatic satchels that diplomats are allowed to use to carry objects between embassies, but those were basically how they transported the devices. There were eyes on the devices the entire time. So, yeah, it's a challenging question.
And I think this is a quite valuable use case that you brought up as well, because it's more towards the kinetic side, where people really need to put their hands on certain things and remember the steps, gets trained. A lot of times when we talk about immersive learning or training, we're talking about people being able to visualize things, or people being able to hear things. But like these kind of experiences will actually have their hands on certain kind of tasks. That is a very valuable learning experiences, especially for people who are more leaning towards the kinetic side of learning experiences. It's another value which we probably didn't highlight a lot in the panel just now, but has a point to add on.
I think that we should probably, I feel like I don't want to be the thing that's standing between us and, between you and a coffee break. So just in the interest of letting the next session get set up in time, I think we'll go ahead and yield the floor. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I think the panel would be delighted to continue any particular conversations or continue the discussion outside or in the expo hall as everyone has time. But please thank me or please join me in thanking our panel here today. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, David.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much to all our panelists.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much. We will be back here again in right around 5 minutes for our next discussion.